Hello, my friends. D.L. Anderson here. Welcome back to Transformation by Truth podcast as we share the truth concerning these last days and what you must do to save yourself from the violent times that are just ahead. Today's podcast is a word of truth accounting of the end times. The end is coming. The end is near. Today's podcast is entitled End Times 573: The Impact of Thoughtlessness and Rejection, Part 3. How imprudence and amorality defeat the spiritual values in your heart. The podcast objectives are: provide a recap of the impact of insanity and dishonesty, analyze why the enemy desires to deregulate your heart, analyze how the enemy deregulates your heart, and analyze the impact of imprudence within your heart. Welcome. Now, before we begin today's lesson, I would like to welcome all my beloved brothers and sisters in Yahushua Messiah who have been scattered to the four corners of the earth, who Yahuwah has joined to this ministry for such a time as this. I would also like to welcome anyone who is engaging our podcasts or videos for the first time. We trust you were led by the set apart spirit in finding us. And if you continue to be led, we hope you stay with us. For these are troubling times, and an evil day is just ahead. To this end, if you are watching this video on YouTube and you have not subscribed to our channel, click the subscribe button below, and you will be alerted whenever we post new videos. Also, if you have any questions at the conclusion of this video, you can ask them using the link in the podcast description below the video player. Last but not least, if you like the video, please give it a thumbs up so YouTube can share it with believers like us. We have already passed the point of no return. Shalom, my beloved brothers and sisters, and welcome to day 575 of our exposition of lawlessness. In the most recent podcast, we completed our analysis of the impact of insanity and dishonesty within your heart, two of the deadliest poisons when taken together. You can see this by observing the image to the right. Vis-a-vis, these 2 degrees have conquered nearly one half of your heart, and we are very early in the progression. Not only this, but they have conquered some very critical faculties and actors. Take, for example, your character, i.e., the primary governor of your heart. Now, consider the following question: how good could you be if your character is driven by insanity and dishonesty? The answer is sure. You wouldn't be good at all. We know this because your character is the primary influencer of your feelings. Ergo, your feelings on many matters will be quite dishonest and quite insane. And whereas in times past, you possessed a system of checks and balances that was designed to keep your character in check, that system is no longer valid, and thus it cannot keep you in check. Now, on the one hand, it was compromised by the evil thoughts that are being pushed from your mind. And on the other hand, it was compromised by your thought alignment center, To wit, insanity forces your heart to resist the truth in favor of the deceptive thoughts it is receiving from your mind. And then she rips the truth out of your heart. This forces your DPU to work with bad data, which will generate intentions that are designed to deceive you into rejecting Yahuwah's will. For if garbage is coming in, then garbage is going out. And because your impressions have been compromised, you won't catch it, which brings us back to square one, i.e., your feelings, which are being manipulated by your insane and dishonest character. Now, here again, this is just the beginning of the progression of thoughtlessness and rejection. And we have already passed the point of no return. This is why I continue to tell you that the knowledge I am sharing is purely educational, for it can't help you if you have already descended to this spiritual plane of death. So let me help you, lest you descend to this spiritual plane of death. Let's get started. The domino effect of deregulation. Now, first things first, we must consider the table below to determine the next phase in the progression of death. To wit, we must determine who is working with imprudence, for she represents the second half of the phase of manipulation. That said, the question we should chiefly entertain is this: what degree of prejudice joins forces with imprudence to push the agenda of rejection in your heart? The answer is sure, and I'll give you a hint. It is the fundamental degree of prejudice. Now, if you answered amorality, you're right. Amorality is the fundamental degree of prejudice, and she is the villain who joins forces with imprudence to push the agenda of rejection in your heart. Well done. Now, like dishonesty, I had many things to say about amorality in times past. And like dishonesty, none of it was good. Not only this, but the return of amorality is much worse than her leading act. Along these lines, the reinstatement of amorality is the biggest setback you will experience during the entire progression of death. And you should know this after everything you learned about amorality. To wit, in End Times 463, How Prejudice Plagues the Heart, Part 3, which was posted on May 5th, 2025, we analyzed the impact of amorality in your heart. And seeing as this impact is so crucial, I advise you to re-engage that podcast whenever you have the time. Now, in beginning to understand the impact of amorality, we must first reconsider one of the more critical aspects of the progression of death, which I will offer as an interest point. Get this: there are 64 degrees of lawlessness that cannot penetrate a regulated mind or a regulated heart. But there are 16 that can. And these are the 16 deadliest degrees of lawlessness. Now, we saw this clearly as we analyzed the impact of ignorance and deception. To wit, they reinstated the degrees of doubt and disobedience in your mind, even though your mind was regulated. Here again, this is something disobedience and doubt could not do on their own. Likewise, the only way ignorance and deception can gain control over your will is if and only if your mind is deregulated. And trust me, a mind filled with ignorance, deception, disobedience, and doubt will be permanently deregulated. Therefore, ignorance and deception joined forces with disobedience and doubt, and together they conquered your mind, even though it had been regulated. Now, as you would expect, the enemy is using a similar playbook for your heart. To wit, thoughtlessness and rejection have joined forces with prejudice and contempt to deregulate your heart. All they have to do is reinstate the degrees of prejudice and contempt. And at this juncture, they have already reinstated dishonesty. And thus, the first domino required to deregulate your heart has already fallen. And now comes domino number two. And this domino is designed to do the greatest damage to you. The thought shield of amorality. Now, per the table below, you can clearly see that amorality is only the second of six dominoes that must fall to deregulate your heart. And despite this fact, it is the biggest domino to fall. Think about that. Now, we can begin to understand why this is the case by observing the diagram below. As you can clearly see, amorality is designed to conquer the sensory region of your left complex, i.e., your physical heart. Now, if you recall, your sensory region is at the intersection between your heart and your mind. To wit, the thoughts that originate within your mind are initially vetted by the physical and spiritual senses within your heart. And after passing this vetting process, these thoughts are passed on to your alignment centers to align with the thoughts in your heart. Now, in times past, the thoughts in your mind were thoughts of obedience and faith. Ergo, the spirit of amorality was reared up to serve as a wall between your heart and your mind. In effect, amorality was originally designed to prevent the thoughts in your mind from entering your heart. But now, the thoughts in your mind are no longer thoughts of obedience and faith. Quite the contrary, they are thoughts of disobedience, doubt, ignorance, and deception. Here lies the inflection and an amazing revelation. I advise you to bookmark as you are led. Amorality has the power to manipulate what enters your heart from your mind. Now, we know this for two primary reasons. First and foremost, amorality is the second half of the phase of manipulation. Ergo, amorality by nature is designed to manipulate your heart. Not only this, but amorality is not just any wall. Quite the contrary, amorality is a thought shield, which is one of many revelations I shared in End Times 463. Along these lines, amorality establishes her vetting process at the intersection of your heart and your mind. This is why it is first and foremost a wall. And yet, amorality also has the power to determine which thoughts will enter your heart. To wit, the wall has an opening, which allows it to operate as a thought shield. Now, in times past, amorality was set to auto resistance, for your mind was regulated. But now, your mind has been deregulated. Ergo, the thought shield of amorality is set to auto acceptance. To wit, it is accepting thoughts that have already deregulated your mind, and thus they will have no problem deregulating your heart, especially in an environment where contempt and prejudice are back in play. And this, my friends, is why amorality, although only the second of six dominoes to fall, does the most damage to your heart. For by manipulating the natural flow of thought, amorality is the driving force of deregulation, and your heart will never be regulated again. There is nothing you can do to stop it. Now, understanding the power of amorality, the question of the hour is quite simply this. Besides reinstation, what role does imprudence play in driving amorality within your heart? The answer is sure, and we can arrive at it by reconsidering the definition of imprudence. Once more, please. By definition, imprudence is a lack of discretion, wisdom, caution, and good judgment, disregard for one's own interests, failure to consider the possible results of your actions. My dear friends, this definition explains why imprudence is teamed up with amorality. To wit, imprudence ensures that the force of amorality cannot be stopped, for it causes you to disregard what is in your best interest. Now, let me tell you something. It is never in your best interest to allow your heart or your mind to be controlled by any process that is contrary to nature. And this is definitely the case for amorality, for it is clearly contrary to nature. And if you reconsider a definition for amorality, you will clearly see this degree of lawlessness is most contrary. Once more, please. By definition, amorality is having or showing no concern about whether a behavior is right or wrong, operating outside or beyond a moral order or code of conduct, having no ethical standards, restraints, or principles. Now, the key phrase in this definition reveals that amorality is operating outside or beyond a moral order or code of conduct. My dear friends, show me a society where this is natural, and I will show you a society of chaos and confusion. Here lies the inflection. To wit, your mind is filled with chaos and confusion. This is why amorality feels natural in this scenario. It is because confusion is the focal degree of deception, which makes confusion the deadliest spiritual disease. Now, the reason why is sure. It's because confusion is a Trojan horse, and not just any Trojan horse. My dear friends, confusion is the deadliest Trojan horse you will ever encounter in your quest. And you know this. If you recall, we analyzed this matter in End Times 524, The Spiritual Disease of Deception, Part 4, which was posted on October 13th, 2025. Here again, I encourage you to re-engage this podcast whenever you have the time. In doing so, you will see that imprudence drives amorality to transfer the confusion that is destroying your mind into your heart. And at this point, there is nothing you can do to stop it. Here is why. Confusion fits the parameters of amorality. For confusion possesses no ethical standards, restraints, or principles, and none are required. Not only this, but confusion also fits the parameters of imprudence. For confusion is void of understanding. Ergo, he cannot possibly understand what is in your best interest, and imprudence does not require it. Not only this, but imprudence prevents you from considering the possible results of your actions. Now, that said, allow me to sum it all up for you. As I say, let me paint a picture of this tragic scene. Vis-a-vis, deception pushes perilous thoughts into your heart, thoughts of error and thoughts of delusion. But more than anything, thoughts of confusion. And when these thoughts enter the gateway into your heart, they will encounter a wall, which functions as a thought shield and a gatekeeper who enforces the prescription of the thought shield. Now, it is clear that the thoughts deriving from your mind are a Trojan horse containing thoughts of confusion, for they are concealed by the ruach of deception, and they are shrouded by a cloak of delusion. And yet, despite this fact, the thought shield determines that these thoughts should enter your heart, for it has no principles or standards, and the gatekeeper will drive these thoughts into your heart, for she has no regard for the consequences of her actions. Now, let me tell you something. The consequences of these actions will be severe, for once the process is started, it will never end. And thus, your heart will forever be subjected to thoughts it cannot trust and feelings upon which it cannot depend. This is the impact of amorality and imprudence. And yet, the damage of rejection is not finished. The damage of rejection is not done. Now, here is the final word. Your life will be filled with many subtractions if you fail to consider your actions. Brothers and sisters, hear me carefully as I say, there are many character flaws and red flags we have seen in this life, but not many are as deadly as failing to do what is in your best interest because you fail to consider the potential outcomes of the choices you make. Here lies the inflection, to wit, imprudence teams up with amorality to cause you to make bad choices, the sum of which will exact the greatest toll. And should you fall quarry to these two poisons, you will lose everything, including your soul. Heretofore, I recommend always consider the consequences of your actions and ask yourself what could go wrong. 4. The wise man will see trouble afar off, and by avoiding the trouble, he will stay strong. Now, here is today's assignment. Meditate on today's lesson, and if you have any questions, please submit them using the form at pinnacleofholiness.com, and I will respond to you as soon as I can. Now, here is what's next. We completed today's podcast, End Times 573, The Impact of Thoughtlessness and Rejection, Part 3. And the next podcast is entitled End Times 574, The Impact of Thoughtlessness and Rejection, Part 4. I will post this podcast on Wednesday, January 28th, 2026. Until then, my friends, continue to be led by the Spirit of Elohim, continue to watch, continue to pray, continue in fasting, and most of all, continue to be focused, for the end is coming